See, I paid for my clothing by picking potatoes. We used to pick potatoes every fall. And that's how I earned my money. I could earn maybe, I can't remember, was it $200 picking potatoes for 3 weeks? My friend Darla and I were partners, and we picked faster than anybody else. We always had the most sacks filled at the end of the day. And it was my job to drive the kids around. My dad and his brothers all had potatoes, and so they went from one farm to the next harvesting. And I drove the truck, and all the kids would jump in the back, and I'd drive them to the fields, then have to deliver them back home at the end of the day, and I kept track of the number of sacks they picked. One day we picked 410 sacks of potatoes. That was 2 baskets. You'd fill your baskets, and then you'd dump them into a sack and go on. And we got 410. I think that was a record. I don't know that anybody picked that many.
When you say pick potatoes, it's really dig potatoes.
Well, Dad with the tractor and the potato digger dug them out of the ground. They came out, bounced on top, and they were on top of the dirt. So you just walk along and pick them up and put them in your basket, and then you would put your basket in the sacks. Well, dump the potatoes in, and then you'd start all over again. So I think we got 7 cents a sack, which was like 3.5 cents for each of us. So we got.
So 410 sacks.
Yeah.
Is times 7. That's $28 for that day.
Yeah.
That's not bad.
Big stuff. Yeah, but the year I was a senior, nobody was picking potatoes. I didn't have anybody to pick up except Darla and I and Genevieve and her partner. And so my dad would go up to the end of the field and turn around and come back twice, and that was all he had that kept us for the morning, and then he'd do it again at noon, and it took a long time to get the field done. Then when I went away to college, they got these potato harvesters that people rode on, and you didn't do sacks anymore. So after we put the sacks on the ground, then somebody had to come down between the rows and load them onto a truck. So the harvester made it much more simple.
And just throw them all into a big truck all at once.
Well, yeah, they would fall out of the conveyor belt down into they would bounce around where you were, and you picked out the leftover vines and rocks and whatever, and then they fell into a container. I never did work on one except, after I was out of college. I came home and I rode on one day. That was the only time I'd ever ridden on one of the harvesters. But cutting potatoes was another thing we did in the spring. You had to cut the potatoes. You had little potatoes, and you had to cut them, make sure that each piece had an eye or two. We used to fix these boards with knives in. You'd sit on a board. It would be you'd put it on the end on a basket, and then you'd put the front part on a basket open, and the bottom of your knife would be down in the basket, and then your knife, and you'd push the potatoes onto the knife and down into the basket.
Touch your hands a lot?
Nope, I didn't. You could very easily have gotten hurt, but fortunately we didn't.
So, when all my memories of your dad are as a grain farmer.
Yeah.
But it sounds like he did lots of everything.
Yeah, he did potatoes and sugar beets and hay for the cows. Grew alfalfa, and then he did some grains. But then after a while, he used to rent property because we didn't have enough to make as much money as what he needed. So we'd rent property, and then we'd get part of the harvest. The owner of the property would get part of the money, and Dad would get some. But he did all the work.
So when you were a kid, what were his main lines of business?
Sugar beets. This is what I mentioned just now. Potatoes and alfalfa and wheat.
But then later on,
he stopped doing sugar beets.
Why?
Because I think the price fell out of bought them. And he used to go to the sugar factory and get pulp once a week to feed the cows. Was what was left over of the sugar beets. And that was stinky stuff. But
Cows didn't care.
cows liked it, yeah.
Then when did he, how old were you when he transitioned from sugar beets to what, milk?
I don't remember
Dairy?
exactly. Oh, we had the dairy all the time. He was doing the dairy all along with the other stuff, with harvesting the crops too. But he gave up the dairy, several years after I left home. And he was in debt, and so he started raising pigs. And pigs were a really good crop. And he filled up the whole yard with pigs and paid off all his debt. And then I think they started raising grain then.
He didn't like pigs? Why did he keep?
Well, he didn't like the pigs. The neighbors didn't like the pigs because they were so stinky. And even though we were at the far end of the town, you know, the breeze would blow up and they complained. So he did it as long as he could to pay off his debt.
And the neighbor said, no more, you're out of debt. Get out, get this pig out.
Just about, yeah. So he quit. And then and David was back home by then, so.
I remember him having pigs when I visited.
Yeah,
That was still in that time then.
yeah.
'Cause I remember didn't use the garbage disposal. You just threw
No, we didn't have a garbage
you just threw it
disposal.
all in the bucket and you take it out and throw it to the
Yeah,
pigs.
well, we did that all the time. That's what we did when I was growing up. You take it down to the pigs. They would eat everything except grapefruit rinds. So you'd have, you know, the half grapefruit rind that would still be in their eating place, but they would eat everything else.
Huh. Well, whenever I eat a grapefruit now, I think of him.
It wasn't his.
What?
It wasn't his grapefruit rinds. It was theirs. The pigs left them behind.
No, I'm just saying, I think it, because he always,
Yeah.
whenever, I remember, you know, your dad was coming to visit, that meant you had to go down and get some grapefruit for him to eat in the morning
Yeah. And yeah, he liked grapefruit.
and study, watch him, what kind of fascination to check out Grandpa eating grapefruit. Just take a spoon in each little cell and
Yeah.
pop that out.